Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Martinez, and we are back from a week-long hiatus. I was at home near Fresno for the Thanksgiving holiday, and we didn't have a show on Tuesday, and we were off here at the GSMC Podcast Network on last Thursday and Friday. So we did not have a show for you guys last week, which was a shame because there was a lot of big games last week, and including the Thanksgiving games too. But don't worry, we're back. We're back just in time. We're getting down. We're getting down to the nitty gritty here. Playoffs are just a few weeks away. Some of you guys may have clinched a spot. Some of you guys may be still fighting for a spot, or most of you are probably just playing spoiler, so your friends will not make the playoffs, which is a good thing too. I love playing spoiler, but we have a lot to talk about today. We have the Monday Night Football game from last night. I'm also going to talk about some top performers as well. And I'm going to give you guys my top waiver wire pickups of the week. And, yeah, so let's get started here. Last night, the Green Bay Packers defeated the Philadelphia Eagles 27-13. And there was a lot of good fantasy performances from the Packers side. So most notably, we have a really good game from Davante Adams. Davante Adams looks like he's kind of emerging as a must start now, so to speak. He had 5 receptions on 6 targets for 113 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's kind of been a really good player for the Green Bay Packers. I think majority of people thought that Davante Adams was going to be the best receiver on the Packers last year because of the injury to Jordy Nelson. Well, it seems that is not that wasn't the case last year, but it looks like we're kind of like a year early predicting Adams' emergence in the Packers offense. But ever since he had that big 13 reception, 132-yard game against Chicago, in October, he has been really good. He's been a must. He's kind of emerging to a must start now. He has 86 targets. He has 8 touchdowns. He's on pace for probably more than 1,000 yards. He's probably going to get it. He has 58 receptions. I think he's someone you have to put in your lineups now. It's tough for me at this point, it's tough for me to sit Davante Adams. I know they got Randall Cobb, and I know they got Jordy Nelson there, but Davante Adams is, the youngest one there. Davante Adams looks like he's more of a complete receiver than Randall Cobb and Jordy Nelson. Don't get me wrong, Jordy Nelson is a phenomenal receiver. Randall Cobb, phenomenal athlete, but, he's just very inconsistent this year. So I do think Davante Adams is kind of like a must start now, especially heading to the playoffs. And when you look at the schedule here for the Green Bay Packers, they got Houston, Seattle, Chicago, Minnesota, to round out the fantasy season. Houston, I do think he might have a little bit of time because remember, Houston still has a pretty reasonable defense. Seattle, really tough defense. Chicago, really great matchup. In Minnesota, they still have a tough defense, so he does have a little bit of a tough schedule here. But I do think the fact that, Aaron Rodgers is still the quarterback, I think, the offense got back on track last night. I think Davante Adams is someone you have to put in your lineups. But let's move on to other top performers of last night for the Packers. Well, the Packers also had a really good performance from Jordy Nelson. He had 12 targets last night, 91 yards. He was the go-to guy for Aaron Rodgers on third down. And, like I said, I do think Davante Adams is kind of emerging as the Packers' number one receiver. But Jordy Nelson, we can't forget about him. He's Mr. Reliable for Aaron Rodgers there. Jordy Nelson has played great this year at times, and I do think he's someone that you still have to insert in your lineups. I did talk about the schedule a little bit, and I would say, Jordy Nelson's still someone you might have to consider starting going down the stretch here. As the Packers, they are going to throw it a lot because they can't run the ball, which I'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, they're going to throw the ball a lot, so Jordy Nelson and Davante Adams are definitely going to get their touches. And Randall Cobb, he had 41 yards and 7 targets. Randall Cobb, he has just been very, very inconsistent this year. He had a really good. He had a pretty slow start to the season. I don't think he had 100 yards. He didn't have 100 yards until week 4 of the season. He barely had over 60 yards for the first 3 weeks of the season, and then had one game of over 100 yards, which was week 4 against the Giants. And ever since then, the highest totals he had was 95 against Chicago, and then he had 84 against the Redskins. So he's been very, very consistent. He's still getting a lot of targets. It's just that, he just hasn't been as effective as Davante Adams and Jordy Nelson has. But something else I want to point out about, Davante Adams, not Davante Adams, excuse me. But actually, something I want to point out about the Packers in general is the running game. And this team cannot run the ball at all. They cannot run the ball one bit. Eddie Lacy's out. Tom Montgomery was the running back. He looked like he was very effective, but James Starks is coming back, so Tom Montgomery had to take a step back. So Tom Montgomery doesn't even have a role anymore. And the Packers got their first rushing touchdown of the season last night. Can't believe that. Aaron Rodgers had literally all the rushing touchdowns for the Packers. So James Starks, he has 17 carries and 41 yards. He wasn't very effective last night. And the fact that this team can't run the ball, I think it bodes well for the receivers and Aaron Rodgers, for those fantasy owners that has Davante Adams, Jordy Nelson, even Randall Cobb. I think Randall Cobb is still a valuable fantasy receiver. Even Aaron Rodgers is probably always going to be a must start. So the fact that they can't run the ball and they're so heavily reliant on the pass, I do think the fact that they can't run the ball at all kind of makes Jordy Nelson, Davante Adams, and Aaron Rodgers must starts. Aaron Rodgers was a must start anyway. I don't think anyone was going to sit him, but that's what I think about the Packers moving forward. To the Philadelphia Eagles now, Carson Wentz played pretty average. He had over 250 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Like the Packers last night, the Eagles cannot do anything. They can get anything going in the ground game. Wendell Smallwood made his first career start. He had 9 carries for 37 yards. I think he only had 1 reception for 10 yards. And, they just couldn't run the ball effectively. Remember, the Eagles were down most of the entire game. So I think that kind of played a part in the running game for Philadelphia. But about the Eagles receivers here, Dorial Green-Beckham was the leading receiver for the Eagles, and I think Dorial Green-Beckham was a guy that I thought would have a pretty good impact in fantasy, but he didn't really do anything when he got to Philadelphia, and I kind of expected time. I kind of expected it to take time for Dory Green Beckham to emerge, get comfortable with the offense. But he had 10 targets last night, 82 yards. I do think I don't know if he's someone that you should go out and rush right away. I do think, Jordan Matthews is still the guy here to own. Darren Sproles had 48 yards. He was effective last night. He only had 6 yards on the ground, but Darren Sproles was highly effective. He could have had even more yards if that one big screenplay wasn't penalized by Dory Green Beckham there. And Jordan Matthews, he came in and came out of the game, I think like twice last night because of a knee issue. But Jordan Matthews did pretty good when he was called upon. But the fact that he missed time in the game kind of screwed his numbers a little bit. He had 4 targets. He caught 4 of them for 47 yards. And Zach Ertz, he was on fire. Coming out of he was on fire coming out of the game. He had 6 targets, and he had 36 yards total. So he kind of had a slow game. He's someone that had I think more than 20 receptions heading into the game, but I do think he's someone that's valuable to own down the stretch. And remember, Zach Ertz was on fire to end the year last year, so I do think he's someone that you need to use, especially for Jordan Reed owners out there that don't know if he's going to play this week or not. But that is basically moving forward for the Philadelphia Eagles here. They have a pretty tough schedule for the offensive players. If Ryan Matthews, he looks like he might miss a week or two, so if he doesn't come back, I do think Wendell Smallwood could be a pretty good RB2 against Cincinnati. Washington could be a pretty good matchup, but after that, Baltimore, they're tough against the run. And New York, they're very inconsistent on defense, so I do think that might be a pretty good matchup for Smallwood. The receivers on the Eagles, like Jordan Matthews, I do think Cincinnati is a pretty reasonable matchup for Jordan Matthews there. Washington could be pretty reasonable. Baltimore, I don't know. New York could be a pretty good. For Carson Wentz, I don't really expect too much out of him moving forward. Remember, he is a rookie. He did play good, but I think he's someone that you need to watch out for next year. I do think he's going to be a very valuable fantasy player next year. So, but we're going to take our first break here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm going to get into some top performers of the week, and I'm going to talk about a couple of receivers who you should trust moving forward down the stretch. But we'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And now it's time to get into some top performers of the week. And man, we had quite a few of them. And I want to start off with the top quarterback, top overall quarterback, or one of the top offensive performers, that is, this past weekend. And that is Colin Kaepernick. That is right. The 49ers quarterback played tremendously well against the Miami Dolphins. And I know it was against the Miami Dolphins defense, but that was the best game he has played all year. Remember, he was on a pretty good roll the past couple weeks as well. Playing against the Patriots, playing against the Cardinals, playing against the Saints and, the fact he played really well against the Cardinals and the Patriots defense, two really good, solid defenses, I do think maybe Colin Kaepernick is back to being a relevant fantasy player. I do think he is. He's kind of a borderline must start at this point. You might have to consider starting Colin Kaepernick moving forward. He is one of my top waiver wire pickups of the week, and I'll talk about that later. But I do think Colin Kaepernick is back to being a fantasy player. He had 3 touchdowns, 296 yards, through the air. But on the ground, 113 rushing yards. He's a leading rusher. That was the 4th most I think he's ever had in his career. That's including the playoffs. But the fact that he runs so well, the fact that he's such a dual threat in a Chip Kelly offense, I do think he is a borderline must start, and I do think he can help you and your team, down the stretch and maybe into the playoffs. But I think he's back to being a relevant fantasy player. I really do think so. But getting back to I'm going to get to another quarterback here that had a really good game this past week was Trevor Siemian. Yes, against the Kansas City Chiefs, Trevor Siemian had 368 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. And, man, this was quite a game to watch, actually. But Trevor Siemian, this is his best game he's played the entire season. I think it's the best game of his career. And, he's been very solid for the Broncos all year long. But for fantasy purposes, I don't think he's someone that you need to rush out and add right away. I do think he's someone that's very inconsistent. He's more of a game manager right now. And don't forget, he's basically a rookie, even though he has 1 year under his belt. But I do think Trevor Siemian is someone that you kind of need to stay away from. You need to be cautious. But what a great game for Trevor Siemian there. And we got Mark Ingram here, the top running back of the weekend here. 146 yards on 14 carries, 1 touchdown on the ground, and 1 touchdown through the air. And I do think he's back to being a RB1 or RB2. He has split time with Tim Hightower, but he is doing the most he can with the touches he has. And this was against an LA Rams defense that has been very inconsistent. I know that, but it looks like Mark Ingram is back to being the player that we thought he was going to be this season. And I want to talk about Tyreek Hill. Man, what a game Tyreek Hill has played. He had 1 rushing touchdown, 1 touchdown on the ground, and he had 1 touchdown on a kickoff return or punt return. What a player this guy is emerging to. He seems like he's a go-to guy for Alex Smith. Even if Jerry Maclin does come back, I still think Tyreek Hill is their best playmaker on this offense. And he is just so flashy. Man, oh man, they are going to find ways to get Tyreek Hill even more involved, I think, after this game. And I think he's someone that you might have to, insert in your lineups moving forward, especially down the stretch and into the playoffs as well. But Tyreek, what an exciting player to watch on the field. And I want to talk about Emmanuel Sanders here. Emmanuel Sanders had a great game. He had 162 receiving yards and a touchdown, and he is the first Broncos receiver to have 100 yards or more since week 3. Wow. That should tell you a lot about Trevor Siemian and this offense. They're very, they don't rely on through the passing game at all. But man, what a game Emmanuel Sanders had. And I don't really, expect Emmanuel Sanders to get a lot of yards moving forward. But he does have a couple of good matchups. He has Jacksonville and Tennessee the next 2 weeks. So I do think those are good matchups, to, kind of assert him in your lineup there. But that was this week's top performers of the week. But, before I did say I want to talk about a couple of receivers that you have to trust. or that you will trust, that you must trust. And that is Quincy and Enunwa and Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins finally, he came back to the lineup for the Buffalo Bills this past Sunday against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was on a limited snap count, but he made the most of what he was given. He made the most of his chances. He had 3 receptions for 80 yards. He had one 62-yard touchdown. So I do think, this was a shake off the rust game, anyway. I didn't expect him a whole lot, but I think he's someone that you have to put in your lineup now. I think it's safe. It's safe to put him in your lineup now, guys. He has really good matchups, coming up. He has Oakland, he has Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Miami. Really good matchups for the stretch run in the playoffs. I do think he's someone that you have to put in there. He is their top guy. Remember, Robert Woods is hurt right now. I don't know if he's ever going to – I don't know what the timetable is on that, but Sammy Watkins is definitely someone you need to insert in your lineups, and I think he's someone you have to trust. I think you have to trust him. And Quincy and Enunwa here, he had a really good game against the New England Patriots, a pretty good, sound defense. 109 yards and 1 touchdown. And, he's been, I think we kind of expected a bigger year from Enunwa since Eric Decker has went down. But remember, this is a Jets offense that hasn't been really consistent. But I do think the Jets have a really, really favorable schedule with a lot of favorable matchups coming up. They got the Indianapolis Colts, the 49ers, and the Miami Dolphins next 3 weeks. And I do think he's someone you can possibly trust in your lineups, especially in this stretch run here. And, Ryan Fitzpatrick played a good game against the Patriots, and he's going to be the starter again. So I do think he has that connection with Enunwa, and I think he's someone that you have to consider starting moving forward. But we're going to take our second break here at the Golden State Fantasy Football Podcast, and I'm going to get into some waiver wire pickups when we come back. But though, guys, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. We're going to get into our top waiver wire pickups of the week. But I have to tell you that the top pickup of the week is a razor from Harry's. And, whenever I like to, get ready for the day, look into the mirror, before I happen to get ready to jump in the shower, I always want to, clean up for the day. I want to look nice, presentable. And I do that with the razors from Harry's. Big razor companies have made a small change. They always come out with the quote-unquote newest version, and they always raise their high prices. Unlike those big corporations, Harry's doesn't believe in upcharging, which is why they made their razors even better, and they're keeping prices exactly the same. Harry's 5-blade razors, they include a softer flex hinge for a more comfortable glide, trimmer blade for hard-to-reach places, a lubricating strip, and a texture handle for more control when it's wet. Harry's is so confident in the quality of their blades. They'll send you their popular free trial set when it comes, which comes with everything I just listed, which is a razor, fly blade cartridges, and shaving gel. You can get your free trial set when you subscribe. Just pay $3 for shipping. And plus, I have a special offer for you guys. Enter code GSMC at checkout to get a post-shave balm for free with your order. That is one of their popular products that they have at Harry's. Go to harrys.com right now and enter code GSMC at checkout to claim your free trial set and Post Shade Bomb. That's harrys.com. That's HARRYS.com. All right, so now we're going to get into our top waiver wire pickups of the week. And I did talk about my top waiver wire pickup a little bit briefly in the last segment, and that is none other than Mr. Colin Kaepernick there. He's been really, ever since the 49ers bye week in week 8, he's been a really productive fantasy quarterback. He's had more than 20 points in like 3 of the last 4 games. And, he's put up respectable numbers against, Arizona, New England. And he absolutely destroyed the New Orleans and Miami defenses, pretty soft defenses. He has really good dual threat ability. He's one of the top running quarterbacks, in the league. I think he's second to Tyrod Taylor. And remember, Kaepernick did not play till week 6, so he could have a lot more rushing yards as we speak. But he's not the most efficient quarterback, but he does have a lot of volume in the Chip Kelly offense. Remember, they like to run a fast-paced offense. He's been a top 10 quarterback for the past 4 weeks. So it's kind of tough to not make the case for Colin Kaepernick as a top 10 quarterback in fantasy now. He's always finishing inside the top 10 for the past 4 weeks, and he does have a very good schedule coming up. He has Chicago this week. He has the Jets. He has Atlanta, and he has the Rams. I do think those are really good teams that he can have success against, and I think he's someone that you have to pick up for the stretch run in the playoffs if you need a quarterback. I just think he's someone that can really help you down the stretch. But dating back to the week 8 bye, after the week 8 bye, Colin Kaepernick has had a total of 9 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. So he's been really good. That's a pretty good ratio for that matter. His completion percentage is a lot better since the bye week, and he's looked like he's more comfortable in the offense now. But yeah, I think he is the top waiver wire pickup of the week. So you guys go get him, folks. And my second top waiver wire pickup of the week is probably Charles Sims. Charles Sims looks like he's eligible to see the field again in week 14 next week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next week, which is he has a lot of favorable matchups coming up. He has San Diego, New Orleans, Dallas, New Orleans again. So he's probably not going to play that game against San Diego, but he is going to come back for New Orleans, and he plays them twice in 3 weeks. So he's someone that's going to be very valuable for this Bucs offense. Because remember, the Bucs are fighting for a playoff spot now, so they're going to be probably in a lot of games. They're going to probably pass the ball a lot. And Charles Sims, that's what he does best. He is great in the passing games. And remember, he hauled in 561 yards last season, and he also averaged 4.9 yards a carry on 107 rush attempts. So he's someone that's very valuable. So I do think when he comes back, I think he's someone that's going to help you down the stretch run. And I think another top waiver wire pickup this week is Malcolm Mitchell. He did have a pretty excellent game against the 49ers. Gronk did not play in that game, but he also had a real good game against the New York Jets. Yeah, he did have 42 yards on 7 targets, but he had 2 touchdowns. He looks like he's kind of involved in this offense a little bit more now. He's kind of earned the role. Remember, he has a total of 140 yards and 3 touchdowns over 2 games. So I think he's someone that kind of has to be taken seriously now, especially in the stretch run. He does have pretty good matchups. He has LA this Sunday. He does have Baltimore and Denver, which are 2 tough defenses. But he does have Tom Brady as his quarterback. So I do think that bodes well for him. And he also has the Jets as well. So I do think he's someone that kind of has to be taken seriously a little bit. And Taylor Gabriel of the Atlanta Falcons was probably the second most exciting player to watch this weekend. The first one, of course, was Tyreek Hill, the Chiefs. But he scored 2 touchdowns on 2 screenplays. And I know he's not going to score a touchdown on every screenplay there is. But he has, looks like he's finding a role in this offense. In his last 4 games, he's averaging at least 80.5 total yards per week. He's been on fire for the past couple weeks. If you look at his past game, past month here, he's had over 70. He has 75 yards or more in the last 2 games. And before that, he has 52 yards and 68 yards. He's averaging at least like 4 to 5 targets in those games. He has a total of 4 touchdowns. He's had all 4 of those touchdowns have come in the last 4 games. So he looks like he's getting involved in his offense for the Falcons. And remember, the Falcons are always a very explosive offense. And, I know it kind of like the concern is there for Tyler Gabriel. When is he going to, get his touches with so many other players on this team? But he's used a lot in the short screens, and he's used a lot in the short passing game. He's always has at least, he looks like he's about to get 6 touches a game. I do think he's going to be someone that's very valuable down the stretch, and I do think he's someone to be taken very seriously. And my final waiver wire pickup of the week is Marquise Wilson of the Chicago Bears. He did have 125 yards and a touchdown on 11 targets against the Tennessee Titans. I do think he's valuable because this receiver core, there's literally no one else is stepping up. He was the only one that stepped up. I thought Cameron Meredith would have maybe stepped up a little bit. Remember, Jay Cutler is not the quarterback anymore, so I thought maybe Cameron Meredith would have had a little bit of touches there with Matt Barkley at quarterback. Jay Cutler looks like he might be out for the year. So Marquise Wilson, he had a really good thing going on with Matt Barkley last Sunday, and he does have pretty good matchups. He has the Niners, Detroit, Green Bay, and Washington. So I do think he's someone that could be very useful down the stretch and into the playoffs. But that concludes this week's waiver wire pickups of the week, and it also concludes the show. But Anthony will be back on Friday. We're going to be recapping the Thursday night game. We're going to be talking about who to start, who to sit, like we always do. And yeah, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. You can check the show out on a variety of platforms: iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube. You can also listen to the website, GSMCpodcast.com. You can follow the show on Twitter at GSMC_FFootball. And on Instagram at the same handle, that is at GSMC_FFootball. You can also like the show on Facebook at the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah Martinez, and you guys have a good rest of the week.